The CUSMA review has officially begun, and the message could not be more stark. This is not a smooth handoff or a technical update.
This is not a transition, this is a rupture. This is a sharp change in a short period of time, driven by a variety of factors.
Ottawa may try to frame the process as routine, but Canadians know better. The tariffs are still there: steel, aluminum, autos, forestry. Each one is a knife at the throat of Canada's economy. And now the renegotiation begins under the shadow of a White House that believes it is already winning. For Canada, the path ahead is not opportunity. It is exposure, pain, and the prospect of hard choices with no easy way out. The uncomfortable truth is that Canada enters this review from a position of weakness. Trump's team senses it, and they are pressing the advantage.
It's clear the Trump administration feels emboldened. They feel they're winning, and I think they're going to give Canada a really hard time as this CUSMA review unfolds.
That is the reality. Ottawa is boxed in. Unlike the NAFTA talks years ago, there is no strong coalition of allies this time. Europe, the UK, and Japan have all signed on to baseline tariffs with Washington. That leaves Canada standing nearly alone, paired only with China in retaliation. What was once a united front has crumbled, and Canada now faces Trump without a safety net. Every attempt at defiance risks backfiring, further isolating the country at a moment when solidarity is gone. Even Canada's traditional leverage is fading. During the last round, American business leaders and members of Congress spoke up loudly in defense of cross-border trade. This time, those voices are muted. Fear of Trump's retaliation keeps them quiet. Only occasional flashes of economic pain in the U.S., like layoffs at John Deere in Iowa, break the silence. Ottawa cannot rely on that to shift the balance. Then there is Mexico. In public, Canada insists on working side by side with its continental partner. In private, everyone remembers that Mexico cut its own deal with Trump in 2018, leaving Canada cornered. That history lingers.
They pulled the rug out from under us a couple of times in the past, and we shouldn't forget that.
The reality is clear. Mexico will act in its own interest, and Canada cannot control the outcome. Ottawa's strategy of leaning on old alliances is fragile at best. For ordinary Canadians, this means the storm is far from over. Steel mills, auto plants, and forestry towns are already hurting if the government cannot secure relief on those tariffs.
And it's not worth the candle.
That is the blunt truth. Canada can talk about diversifying into Asia or Europe, but those promises remain uncertain and years away from real impact. Right now, Trump holds the stronger hand, and Canada faces the consequences. The review will drag on, likely long and painful, while jobs and industries at home remain under siege. What Ottawa sells as resilience looks in practice like desperation. And here is the added weight. Canadians are not just spectators. Families paying more for groceries, workers watching layoffs ripple through auto and steel, and rural towns losing forestry contracts. They all feel the squeeze. The review process may take months, even years, but the economic pain is immediate. Instead of relief, each failed negotiation session risks pushing more companies to scale back or relocate. The backfire is not abstract. It is lived reality in every paycheck that shrinks, and every community left uncertain about its future. This is why the warnings ring so sharp. The CUSMA review is not just about diplomacy. It is about survival.
We know we can't control what other nations do. So we're focused on what we can control, building our strength right here at home.
What we have today is Mark Carney, after 6 months, has not approved a single national project anywhere in Canada. He's not permitted a single major mine, pipeline, nuclear plant, or anything else.
Canada is drowning under the weight of tariffs, job losses, and investor flight. At the very moment when the country needed bold leadership, Mark Carney promised to deliver speed and strength through so-called national projects. He vowed to cut red tape, to unleash construction, to rebuild the economy under pressure from Trump's tariff wall. Yet 6 months into his mandate, the first official list of priority projects has arrived, and it carries one glaring omission: no pipeline. Not a single oil pipeline, not even the hint of one. For a nation built on energy, the message is clear. Carney's grand vision has stalled before it even left the ground. The promise of build, baby, build has turned into a waiting game, and Canadians are paying the price. Communities that were promised prosperity now face silence, paperwork, and more delays.
The backlash was immediate. Pierre Poilievre wasted no time calling Carney's record pathetic. He reminded Canadians that in just half a year, Carney has approved nothing. No mine, no nuclear plant, no pipeline. Meanwhile, 39 projects remain frozen in the regulatory maze, another 100 stuck in Saskatchewan alone. Investors have already voted with their wallets, pulling $62 billion out of Canada, the largest capital flight in modern history. 86,000 jobs have vanished, leaving families desperate while Carney smiles for the cameras. Poilievre's message was blunt. Canada doesn't need another Ottawa office sending emails, it needs bulldozers, workers, and shovels in the ground. His Canadian Sovereignty Act aims to tear down the Liberal anti-development barricades, carbon taxes, pipeline bans, Bill C-69, and reopen the country for business. In his words, Carney promised the fastest growth in the G7, but delivered the fastest collapse.
Carney's defense is as weak as it is predictable. He claims pipelines are not off the table, but insists they require private investors to step forward. Instead of energy arteries, he dangles ports, Arctic infrastructure, and clean energy projects as proof of progress. But Canadians know better. Without oil pipelines, there is no serious plan to rescue jobs or revenues. That is why Alberta Premier Danielle Smith erupted, calling pipeline construction essential for national unity. She and other conservative voices blame Ottawa's stranglehold, an endless web of impact assessments, tanker bans, and anti-pipeline rules that scares companies away before they even submit an application. Carney hides behind the system, insisting he can, quote, work within the existing laws. The provinces call it what it is, paralysis. By clinging to bureaucracy, Carney is strangling the very lifeblood of Canada's economy, and every week of delay deepens the wound for energy workers who cannot wait any longer.
And so Canada faces a stark choice. On one side, the country bleeds jobs, loses investment, and sinks deeper into dependency, while Trump's tariffs bite harder every month. On the other side lies the promise of energy projects that could restore confidence, rebuild communities, and remind Washington that Canada is no pushover. But that path requires leadership, courage, and the will to cut through red tape. Instead, Carney clings to committees, studies, and empty promises. For ordinary Canadians, it means fewer paychecks, higher bills, and a shrinking future. The warning signs are flashing red. Unless Carney abandons his bureaucratic backfires and delivers real projects, pipelines included, Canada will remain stuck at a crossroads, waiting for growth that never comes. And if Carney refuses to act, history will remember him not as the man who built Canada up, but as the Prime Minister who let it fall behind.
New numbers from Statistics Canada show return trips from the U.S. in May dropped 32% compared to last year. With the weak dollar and economic uncertainty, flying is increasingly becoming a luxury, with Canadian trips overseas down nearly 23%. And Americans aren't coming here as often either, with their visits down for a fourth month in a row.
It began with a stunning rejection. Nearly 100% of Air Canada's flight attendants voted against a wage deal negotiated by their own union. Such overwhelming defiance is rare, but it exposes something deeper. This is not just a fight over pay. It is a symptom of an economy under stress and of a government losing control. Mark Carney promised Canadians that his leadership would steady the ship through Trump's tariff storm. Instead, he now faces a wave of worker anger and industrial unrest. Even in an industry so central to Canada's identity, the cracks are impossible to ignore. The aviation sector, tied at every turn to the American market, is showing just how fragile Carney's promises have become. Families now watch nervously, knowing higher fares and disrupted flights will be yet another burden on household budgets already stretched thin by rising prices.
The airline industry has always been brutal. Costs are relentless. Wages make up about a quarter of total expenses, fuel another 30%, with taxes, landing fees, and aircraft purchases stacked on top. Carney claimed that his trade diversification agenda would shield Canadian carriers from Trump's tariffs. Yet Air Canada is now mired in disputes and uncertainty. Without access to the U.S. market, the most lucrative destination, Canadian airlines cannot survive. Warren Buffett once quipped that the industry has lost more money than it has ever made. That warning is now hitting home in Canada. Carney's rhetoric about building resilience looks hollow when the country's flagship airline finds itself trapped between angry workers and a dependence on American passengers. Communities from Toronto to Vancouver are realizing that flight cancellations or higher ticket prices are not isolated problems. They are the latest sign that government policy has backfired and left Canadians with fewer options and higher costs. The truth is clear. Carney's talk of diversification was nothing more than political theater. He boasted of opening new markets in Europe and Asia, but the numbers speak louder than his speeches. 75% of Canadian exports still flow south across the border. For airlines, for manufacturers, for farmers, the United States remains the lifeline. No other market offers the scale, proximity, and integration that the U.S. provides. By promising that Canada could stand alone, Carney created false expectations. Now workers see the reality. Strikes, stalled deals, and business uncertainty show that his policies backfire, leaving communities more exposed than before. Every attempt to pivot away from America has only highlighted just how irreplaceable the American market truly is. Whether it is aircraft full of passengers or trucks loaded with goods, the flow southward is what sustains Canada, and without it, the economy begins to stall.
From a rejected labor deal in the airline industry, a larger truth emerges. Canada is not on a path to independence from the United States. It is more entangled than ever. Carney's empty bluff that he could build a new future without leaning on America has collapsed under the weight of real-world economics. Workers lose faith, industries stumble, and families bear the cost. This is not stability. It is fragility masquerading as strategy. The harsh reality is that every move to challenge Trump's tariffs, every promise to diversify, every claim of resilience has backfired. Canada's economy remains chained to the U.S., and Carney's leadership is being exposed as little more than words. For Canadians, the turbulence is just beginning, and the storm ahead may prove far rougher than anything seen so far. The question now is how long the country can endure before even more sectors collapse under the weight of promises that were never real to begin with.
A new report from Food Banks Canada that food insecurity in this country continues to rise.
A lot of people with jobs are now having to stop at the food bank on the way home from work instead of the grocery store because that's just out of reach.
Food security in Canada is now at a breaking point, and that should alarm every household across the country. How did a G7 nation reach the stage where millions of families line up at food banks instead of grocery stores? Is it Trump's tariffs squeezing supply, or the boycott of American goods inside Canada? Or is it both combining into one perfect storm? The evidence is stark. Food Banks Canada says more than a quarter of households, 25.5%, cannot afford enough food in 2025, compared to just 18.4% 2 years earlier. Statistics Canada reports poverty and food insecurity have surged by 40% in that same period. In its national report card, Canada received a failing grade, a D, on food security. These numbers are not statistics in a vacuum. They reflect mothers skipping meals, children arriving at school hungry, and workers ending their day at a food bank because the supermarket is out of reach. This is the reality Carney promised to prevent, but is now unfolding on his watch. At the root of this crisis lies a trade war that Canada could not escape. On August 7, 2025, President Trump imposed reciprocal tariffs of 10 to 50% on over 60 countries, including Canada. The threat of a 100% tariff on imported chips looms over the global supply chain. For Canada, the immediate pain came in food. The United States supplies roughly 57% of Canadian agricultural imports. When Trump's tariffs drove up costs across American farms and factories, those increases bled directly into Canadian shelves. Canadians who once managed to stretch a paycheck now face soaring bills for eggs, meat, and vegetables. Even those with steady jobs are not safe. Food banks report that more working families than ever are joining the lines, proof that wages cannot keep up with prices. Instead of shielding Canadians from Trump's pressure, Carney's government has left the border wide open to imported inflation. Ottawa had months to prepare, yet the policies announced were reactive, fragmented, and far too small to cushion the blow. External shocks are only half the story. Inside Canada, politics and protest have added fuel to the fire. The boycott of American goods, born from anger at Washington's tariffs, became a rallying cry. Canadians reduced cross-border shopping and turned away from U.S. brands. But this symbolic act carried a price. With fewer options, Canada leaned on alternative suppliers at higher cost, pushing grocery bills even higher. At the same time, housing remains scarce, youth unemployment is climbing, and food banks face historic demand. More than 4 million visits were recorded in the past year, compared to 600,000 before the pandemic. The boycott may have carried moral weight, yet it magnified economic pain. Families see only exhaustion, while Ottawa offers speeches instead of solutions. The government points to programs like Build Canada Homes, a $13 billion housing push, and the Canada Disability Benefit, worth $200 a month, as proof of action. But against the cost of living in Toronto or Vancouver, such measures barely make a dent. They sound bold in press releases, yet on the ground they fail to bridge the $1,000 gap between benefits and poverty lines. The truth is unavoidable. Food insecurity in Canada is no longer a fringe issue, but a national vulnerability. It is the result of twin forces: Trump's tariffs driving up external costs and domestic policies that backfired under Carney's leadership. Unless Ottawa finds a balance between trade strategy and internal support, food insecurity could harden into a structural weakness. And when a wealthy nation cannot feed its people, that weakness becomes more than an economic problem. It becomes a strategic liability that exposes Canada on the world stage.